If you're struggling with rising rent, frustrated by house prices, or investing in property, you've likely heard that immigration is to blame. But is that really true? Let's find out. Let's cut through the noise and uncover the facts. Now, before we dive in, you might be wondering why the hell you should listen to me. Well, I've spent since 2013 building a UK-wide home buying company, British Home Buyers, a nationwide estate agency, British Home Sellers. And over that time, we've handled over 13,000 property transactions, totaling over £3.3 billion. And in that time, I've seen how both migration and policy changes impact the housing market. So let's break down whether immigration is the real culprit or if something else is at play here. Let's set the scene by looking at where we are right now. Average house prices are now at record highs. Rental prices are starting to match back against average earnings inflation, but I think we all agree it's ultimately still too high. And we're still nowhere near building at the pace we need to build 1.5 million homes this Parliament, with a severe shortfall of new housing plaguing the property market ever since the 1980s. So these challenges have led to growing frustration, and of course, immigration often gets the blame. After all, how can close to 1 million people enter the country within a year and that not put big pressure on not just housing, but our entire infrastructure? I'm not sure anyone can really argue with that logic. But there are myths out there that muddy the water, and I'm going to quickly run through 3 of these popular myths on immigration's role in the housing crisis, so that you and me can judge together if they're true or not. Myth 1, migrants take all the social housing.
London. Let's get London on the screen now. This shows a heat map, as it were, of Greater London, all of the London boroughs. Let's get that on our screens and talk us through what we're seeing here, Mike.
So yeah, this is quite astonishing stuff. So the borough that has the highest percentage number is Brent. 39% of British nationals in social housing, 61% non-UK household heads, about 50% of those are unemployed. In second place, you've got Westminster, so you've got sort of 40.3% UK-born nationals. Non-UK household heads, it's about 59.7%.
Yep.
Then you've got Haringey, 40.9%, non-UK-born, 59.1%. Ealing, 42.1% are British-born social, housing.
In fact, let's get that list up. I think we have the list that we can put on screen now. This shows all of those London boroughs. And what leapt out to me when we get that list up is there are 14 boroughs where there are more foreigners in social housing. There it is, 14 boroughs with more foreigners in social housing than Brits.
So that is pretty astonishing, isn't it? Because one of the most common claims at the moment is that migrants are given priority access to social housing. But is that true? I know clearly from that clip, it seems undisputable that migrants clearly hold a huge volume percentage of social housing in those areas that were mentioned in that clip. But then at the same time, you have the Chartered Institute of Housing claiming that new migrants arriving in the UK are generally not eligible for social housing except in very limited circumstances, such as domestic violence cases. And most councils have local connection rules, meaning priority is given to long-term residents rather than newcomers. They claim in the article migrants often have far less access to social housing than UK-born citizens, and that 9 out of 10 new social housing lettings go to British nationals. That from the data points available from the 2021 census, that puts 15% of people living in social housing were born outside the UK. So which is it? Personally, it would be great if the data from that video I shared was shared and how it was calculated was shared and made public, because I can't seem to find that actual data anywhere that's from that clip. In the article linked with the clip, it mentioned that the date came from the 2021 census and questionnaires that were gathered and administrative data and door-to-door inquiries. But I just think it would be so good to have complete transparency of the data. And if you're watching, know where that data is, comment it below. But what do you guys think about all of this? Even that low estimate of 15% of social housing going to migrants seems very, very high. Surely we shouldn't have any migrants in social housing, that immigration should be about people coming to this country to add value to our system, to our country, not to take benefits from it. But at the same time, we do have a social responsibility to take migrants from war-torn countries and the like, for instance. It would be great to know what you guys think in the comments below, because it is a tricky topic. Myth 2, immigration drives up house prices. Now, it's true that migration obviously contributes to population growth, but is it really the main reason house prices have actually skyrocketed? Regina Serpa, a lecturer in housing studies at the University of Stirling, wrote this article. In it, she talks about how migration has become the most toxic issue in British politics, often driven by emotional narratives rather than facts, she claims. That the whole topic has been and become a battleground for political debate. Essentially, her point is it's easy to just blame immigration for housing shortages, but she claims the reality is more complex than that. Serpa points out that while there is some evidence that migration has, of course, contributed to rising house prices, the scale of this effect is actually difficult to assess, that there are other major factors that are also influencing house prices, probably with more of an impact than immigration. So they include things like the right to buy policy, which has significantly reduced the supply of social housing, the austerity measures that brought in that cut social housing funding significantly, and of course a general chronic underbuilding of new homes, which has led to this growing supply-demand imbalance we can all see in front of our eyes. Furthermore, the notion that migrants take up all available housing, she claims, is misleading. She points out that around 80% of migrants who have lived in the UK for less than 5 years reside in the private rental sector, compared to just 20% of UK-born people, and that research shows that only about 20% of migrants live in social rented accommodation, a figure very similar to that of UK-born citizens, and that government data indicates that 90% of lead tenants in social housing are UK nationals. So the real cause of housing shortages, Serpa argues, is not migration, but policy failures in housing supply and affordability. Since 2010, England and Wales have lost 300,000 units of social housing, driven by government cuts and policies shifting social homes to affordable rents, which are still largely unaffordable to low-income households. So I think in conclusion, she makes a good point that yes, there is of course some evidence that migration has increased house prices. After all, you add people to the mix, that's going to add demand. But blaming migrants as the main driver to the housing crisis is probably not the way to go. As Serpa and other housing professionals highlight, further restricting access to housing for migrants doesn't actually address the underlying failures in housing policy set by government. Instead, government should be focusing on building more affordable homes and reforming the planning system to meet the growing demand that we've got. So the real cause of house prices growing are probably more like the lack of new homes being built. Over the last decade, house building has clearly failed to keep up with demand, because even if net migration dropped to zero, the gap between supply and demand would still persist due to years of underinvestment, years of not building enough. Simply put, the housing crisis is a supply issue first and foremost, with immigration just being one of those things that clearly doesn't help. I know this is a really emotive topic. What do you guys think on this? What do you guys think of this video with this channel? I'm trying to offer you both sides of the argument to think and talk about, and obviously I hope I'm doing a good job of it. The final myth, myth 3, migrants don't contribute to the economy. Another major debate is that migrants come over, use up all our resources like the NHS, housing and so on without contributing enough through taxes. Is this true? The Office for Budget Responsibility modelled the lifetime financial impact of an average migrant arriving at the age of 25. And they created this clever graph that shows the financial impact of that 25-year-old migrant compared to someone born in the UK. So if you look at that light grey line that represents an average UK-born resident like me or you, for instance, you can see how all the way to 25 years of age, that person is taking up more and more of the country's resources. For example, things like going to school and all those costs we all pay as a country, as a society, to raise children. You can see that grey line starts to rise as you get older and get a job and start paying taxes and so on. And on average, we only become an overall net positive to the country financially by the time we get to about 45, which really surprised me. Now, of course, that is an average. So if you're paid more than average wage, you're higher paid, you'll pay more taxes and you'll get there sooner. The other line represents a 25-year-old migrant where, of course, we haven't incurred any costs to the country up to that point. They've not gone to school here and so on. And you can see that light blue line shows that a high wage migrant clearly outperforms our average. Our average wage migrant worker, that dark blue line, again, also outperforms our average because they haven't used up our resources growing up by going to school here and so on. But the important line is that purple line that represents a low wage migrant worker, which, as you can see, never ends up contributing positively at all. So clearly, low wage migrant workers are a net negative. So the true answer to this is studies consistently show that average and higher paid migrants pay more in taxes than they receive in public services, without a doubt. The problem tends to be with lower wage migrant workers. So the interesting findings from the fiscal impact of immigration in the UK report is that the financial impact of migration depends on the age, skills and earnings migrants in prime working ages. The fiscal impact of migration depends on the age, skills and earnings. That migrants in prime working age, so 25 to 54, tend to have the most positive financial contribution. The Office of Budget Responsibility forecasts that higher net migration actually reduces deficits and debt because migrants are more likely to be working age and paying taxes, and that migrants earning the UK average salary tend to contribute more over their lifetime than UK-born workers on average, as they never needed state-funded education, for instance, or early life public services. And studies consistently show that migration's net fiscal impact is relatively small. It represents less than 1% of our GDP, meaning migration alone is not actually a major financial burden. Dynamic studies indicate that restricting skilled worker migration would have negative impact on public finances, while restricting family migration of care workers may have a small positive impact due to reduced social service costs. A common misunderstanding is that migrant households with children are a financial burden. While children require public spending, healthcare and education, their future earnings often then compensate for this as they enter the workforce, which would be the same with any UK-born child. So let's have a reality check on this. What is migration's economic role here? Well, migrants are essential for key industries, particularly construction, healthcare, and hospitality. Reducing migration could worsen labour shortages, making it harder to build those 1.5 million new homes, for instance, and deliver public services. The OBR has also found that higher migration rates delay some of the fiscal challenges posed by our ageing population. However, long-term planning is needed to balance the benefits and the cost of migration. So look, this is a really tough one. Clearly, the right migrants are a positive to the country, the wrong ones aren't. Do you think the government's getting the balance right at the moment? Do you think things need to change? comment below. So what's the real cause of the housing crisis here? Now that we've gone through those 3 common myths in detail, it is clear by virtue of physics that adding hundreds of thousands of people into our island of a country that isn't building anywhere near enough new homes or infrastructure to counterbalance it is causing issues. But the terrible reality I don't think politicians like to be honest with us about is it seems we need more and more average and high paid migrants, the right migrants, to enter the country to balance the books. But the way it feels at a country level is the government is just taking in more tax from migrants, for instance. They're all paying their way once they're here, but then the government's not spending more to scale the country's infrastructure to cope with it. So you end up with the same resources spread across more and more people. You know, even if immigration ended tomorrow and we saw our population stay flat or even start to drop slightly year on year, we would ultimately still have a housing crisis until we get on top of the shortfall in housing we've accumulated. Granted, we'd get on top of that shortfall quicker. The foundational cause of the UK housing crisis is in reality, number 1, planning system constraints, overly restrictive planning regulations that are limiting land availability for development. The second is underinvestment in housing. There's been a long-term failure to build affordable housing at scale. But 3, economic policies. Government policies have incentivized property investing while then at the same time it limiting opportunities for first-time buyers. This is a really tough topic. I really wasn't sure I wanted to get tangled into with this channel, and a topic I'm honestly not 100% sure I'm getting it right on. Let me know if there's anything I've missed, whether you think this video is sharing a balanced, objective, fair view of things or not. I'm genuinely interested about what you think, and promise will do my best to reply to all of your comments, as you'll know from my previous videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video up here.